Good morning and welcome to Forums That Matter, a community service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland. We're very happy to have everybody here in person today and also our valued virtual attendees. My name is Laura Christian Imbernoni, a member of the Forum Committee, and I'm moderating today's discussion on food insecurity. A few housekeeping items first. If you're here in person, please be sure your phone is off or on airplane mode. We'll have questions and answers with our speakers from 9:30 until around 10. Debbie Wright will provide a mic for our in-person audience. We ask our virtual audience to type questions in the Q&A box that you see on your screen. This program is recorded and will be available in a few days on our website at uucleveland.org. The topic today, food insecurity challenges and solutions, is a timely and sad one. As many as 200,000 people go hungry in Cuyahoga County. Food shortages and increases in food costs make it difficult for the food bank to supply food distribution sites and for individuals to purchase food as well. As it happens, our two speakers today both have years of involvement working with the challenges of food insecurity. Julie Johnson is the CEO of Hunger Network with 30 years experience working primarily with underserved, disadvantaged, and marginalized populations. She was recognized in 2022 and 2021 in the Cleveland 500. Julie served in numerous board leadership positions, including the Association of Fundraising Professionals, National Philanthropy Day, and Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention Association of Ohio. She currently serves on the advisory board of Cuyahoga County Division of Senior and Adult Services. She lives in University Heights, Ohio, with her husband and 4 children. We'll hear from Julie after we're here from the first speaker, who is Dr. Darcy Freedman. Dr. Freedman is professor and director of Sweatland Environmental Health Sciences at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. She's nationally recognized for her contributions to community nutrition. Dr. Freedman's community-engaged research agenda focuses on developing and evaluating policy and system-level interventions to promote health equity. She's an active member of Cleveland-Cuyahoga County Food Policy Coalition and the Ohio Nutrition Incentive Network. Dr. Freedman is a 2022 winner of the CWRU Innovation for Impact Award for her technology that supports nutrition incentive programming in farmers markets across the whole United States. She lives right here with her husband and 2 sons in Shaker Heights, Ohio. Dr. Freedman is our first speaker today. And Dr. Freedman, we really look forward to your remarks at this time.
Great. Thank you, Laura, and thank you for inviting us to be here today for hopefully an enriching conversation about food security, and I think particularly the second part, solutions to address this really persistent problem. Just as a way of introduction, how did I get to studying food security? When I was a PhD student, one of the things I was committed to do was community engaged research. So I really didn't care what the topic was. Actually, I had been studying HIV/AIDS prevention, teen pregnancy prevention, and I happened to be in a study around childhood obesity prevention. And in that project, we did a photo voice project. And photo voice is this combination of photography and group discussion to try and unpack the root cause of a problem. And this is back when, pre-phone cameras, where you gave people disposable cameras, and I was printing off all of their pictures. And there was this beautiful picture of a tomato in a kind of like a nature's oasis, urban, a market, sort of an alternative marketplace that a lot of people were thinking was the solution to a lot of the problems we have related to the food system. And this was in Nashville, Tennessee. And so when the woman described that tomato, she said, "This is like the dress I see in the window, something I always wanted but never could have." And it still chokes me up today to imagine that anybody could possibly say that a tomato is so outside of the reach that it is a luxury item. And so that was about 20 years ago. And I, again, never said food was going to be my thing, but I was really committed to community as a central focus in my work. And what I found is that food comes up all the time as the #1 priority in communities. And so I'm going to share a little bit about some of the big picture trends that we know, and also around some solutions that we're thinking about locally around, food system level change. As Laura mentioned, I serve as the director of the Mary Ann Swetland Center for Environmental Health, and I just wanted to give a little orientation. What is our center? We study the complex interplay between the environment and human health outcomes. And I think the second part is really important about our center. We place special emphasis on community engaged approaches that address the role of structural racism in creating and sustaining health inequities. We seek to translate these findings into policies, practices, and relationships that promote community health. So we're unique. There's really not another center like us at CASE. And I think that gives you a little context to the work that we do. And I do want to applaud your church, just seeing all the things you're doing here to promote environmental health for your energy, your water, your garden. So thank you for that great work. So what is the problem? Why is systems change needed in the food system? And I always like to start off with this quote by Deming, and many of you have probably heard this before, this idea that every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it does. So if we think about our food system, what does our food system achieve in Greater Cleveland? And maybe some people in the room here, what do you think our food system achieves?
A shortage of 200,000 people.
Right. So we heard, we have food shortages, we have food waste, we have a lot of chronic disease because of the quality of the food. It's the #1 item in the landfill in Cuyahoga County, and every landfill in the country is food. And Julie will talk a little bit more about that. So it's not a good system. It does not produce a lot of good outcomes. And I could go into many of these outcomes, but today I'm going to mainly focus on food insecurity. One definition is limited or uncertain availability of nutritionally adequate and safe foods, or limited or uncertain ability to acquire acceptable foods in socially acceptable ways. So if we start to look at trends related to food insecurity, we can see based on the data that the food system achieves worse outcomes the closer you get to Cleveland. And what you can see in this chart here is 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. And the blue is Cleveland, Cuyahoga orange, gray is Ohio, and then the yellow is the United States. So across the board for our state, we perform worse than the US average, which in 2021 was 10.2%. So about 1 in 10 Americans are food insecure. But in Cuyahoga County, it's actually 2, or in the city of Cleveland, it's about 2 out of 10 people in our city are food insecure. We also can see that the food system persistently achieves worse outcomes for Black and Brown communities. So this is a slide looking at data from 2001 to 2021, so 20 years of data. And the gray dashed line is the national trend. So in 20 years ago, about 10.7% of Americans were food insecure, and despite all of the things that have been done, policies, practices, programs, etc., we're basically where we started, about 1 in 10 Americans. So this is clear data that tells you this is exactly what our food system is designed to achieve, that about 1 in 10 people will be food insecure. But I think more importantly, which is a horrible statistic in the wealthiest nation in the world, but more importantly is you look at the disparities. And what we see is that food insecurity is about 2 to 3 times higher for African American and Latino, Latinx families. And again, this is a persistent trend. There's really been nothing that there's been changes, but the inequity that is, between whites who actually have about 7% food insecurity, almost 2 to 3 times higher. The other thing that I think is important to highlight is how big of a financial problem this is. So these are data looking at the annual food budget for shortfall in Cuyahoga County. So looking at 2017, 18, 19, 20. This is really, 20, we had COVID, so that was a pretty hard year. $440 million, so over $100 million per year of food shortage. So when we start to think about solutions, it's really hard to imagine, like, where do we pull in this level of financial support to solve the problem? And to me, this motivates even more, like, how do we think about fixing the system? Because there's no plug, there's no $120 million Band-Aid that we want to apply every single year to this problem. So what are the structures that produce food inequities? This is I'm not going to go through all of the details of this chart here. I just want to make 2 points. One is that why do we see those racial disparities? And part of that is because where we live is racially circumscribed. And we know that, especially in a city like Cleveland, many of you know about redlining, and you know that, these are historical practices, almost 90-year-old practices that have put people in neighborhoods that are repeatedly disinvested in. So when you go to Central neighborhood in Cleveland and you go to Shaker Heights, you're really in a completely different environment, not only in terms of food access, but schools, housing, etc. And the long-term consequence of that, so the second point I want to make is that it plays out in terms of our health outcomes. I'm in a school of medicine, so ultimately my interests around the food system are really around health. I'm really interested in how do we promote health among populations. So this is a slide that takes all kinds of different health outcomes: diabetes, smoking, obesity, blood pressure, cholesterol, etc. And it's looking at these by redlining status of the neighborhood. This is zip code, national level zip code data. A is the best neighborhood, B, C, D are the red line neighborhood. And it's pretty easy to see that stair step, right? The red is performing worse than the yellow, yellow worse than the blue, and blue worse than the green. So there's a benefit to being in a community that was not historically redlined. Lastly is around creating solutions. So how can we transform the food system to promote health equity? And a lot of the work that we've been doing at the Sweatland Center in partnership with groups like Hunger Network and other groups is to try and understand what could be a new frame for describing the goal of the food system, and how do we then set ourselves on a path to achieve that goal. And as a team, we've come up with a new frame that we call nutrition equity. And the definition of nutrition equity, again, built through a very collaborative process, is to promote freedom, hope, and dignity in food traditions, resulting in people and communities healthy in body, mind, and spirit. So what would it look like if we set nutrition equity as a goal and we work to create change? Right now, the Sweatland Center, with partners at the FAIR Project, Food Access Raises Everyone, and Neighborhood Connections, are implementing a study called Nourishing Neighborhoods, Empowering Community Study. And I'm just briefly going to introduce the intervention that we have called the Nourishing Power Network. Our study, it's a community action research project to test ways to transform food systems by bridging community power, with organizational power to spark and expand food justice initiatives led by the community. And that's really at the heart of that idea of nutrition equity, that community has to be part of the change. If we drop something in, it's not likely to be sustainable and may not even create any impact. Our vision is to root and grow a food system that promotes nutrition equity, freedom, hope, and dignity in food traditions, specifically resulting in holistic health for Black, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Asian, and Indigenous communities. And that's because we saw those disparities. These are the groups that we know if the food system works for this group, it will probably work for everybody. And lastly, just to highlight here, as a lot of people, when we were moving from our idea of nutrition equity to our intervention, they said, well, what is it that we would do? And honestly, I can't tell you there's one thing that if we all just did that, it would change the food system. But what we came up with is this idea of these 4 components, that if these things were working together, we could probably change this system. So we have an advisory council of community leaders guiding the process. We have a fellowship program to bring new people in the space and help build up their ideas for community-driven food systems change. We have a funding model that provides resources to ignite these community change projects. And lastly, we have networking, the space where people can come together, connect, build relationships, and sort of activate energy around change. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Julie, who's going to give us a bit more about what's happening in our local community.
Thank you so much, Darcy. I appreciate that. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. Present with you here today, my name is Julie Johnson, and I'm the CEO of Hunger Network. And we are a proud partner of the Nourishing Power Network. I'd like to add that in. We definitely want to be part of the systemic change that's there, but Hunger Network is more of a grassroots-based organization. So we're kind of those boots on the ground that work neighborhood to neighborhood, trying to provide the culturally relevant food in a dignified manner in each neighborhood across the greater Cleveland community. Sorry, I'm not advancing here for some reason. There we go. So Darcy was mentioning a little bit about food insecurity in the greater Cleveland area. And so I just wanted to show some of the different slides. These are all statistics that have been derived from the Center for Community Solutions community fact sheets. So it's been a number of years of study going into where is food security and insecurity in the population here in Cleveland itself. So as you can see, food insecure people, or people who are eligible to receive food assistance currently in our system, are those who are living at less than 200% of the poverty level. And if you look at greater Cleveland as a whole, that number is 56% of the population who reside there. The highest levels of food insecurity are in Cleveland areas Ward 5, followed by Ward 7 and Ward 14 at 78.3% down to 69%, which really is not that drastic of a drop, but those are the 3 highest communities. And so what you're seeing here on this chart is the number of people who actually live in the ward, represented up here by this line. And then the number of food insecure folks are this green line below. So you can kind of see throughout greater Cleveland. And the food insecurity rate is more greatly concentrated in the city of Cleveland versus Cuyahoga County. And so I'll show you some of those Cuyahoga County statistics. So throughout entire Cuyahoga County, about 34.4% of the population faces food insecurity. This little green highlighted area that you see over here, this is Shaker Heights. This is where we're at, just to kind of give you an idea of food insecurity. And then the concentration map shows the areas of greatest need from 1 all the way up to 5. So again, you can see all along in the downtown greater Cleveland areas, those are the highest concentrations of food insecurity that we're seeing. And just again, put it into perspective, into county districts, we're looking at District 3, District 7 and 8, and then District 10 up here, focus on the areas of greatest food insecurity. And again, the same statistical mapping. One of the things that Hunger Network strives to do is we strive to provide pantries and hot meal sites concentrated in those areas of the greatest poverty and the greatest food insecurity rate. And so this is a map that's actually on our website, hungernetwork.org, where you can go in and type your address and it will show you where all of the different food sources are around the city of Cleveland. Where you see a single apple in a hand, that represents one community resource. And then, for instance, here in this little yellow circle, there's 20. And then 7 and corresponding all the way up the area. So again, if you're looking at the downtown area, this is where we're concentrating our efforts and trying to deal with the issues of food insecurity. This is some information that's actually been provided by the food bank. So we work with the Greater Cleveland Food Bank. In fact, Hunger Network is the largest food purchaser from the Greater Cleveland Food Bank. We couldn't do what we do without the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, and the Greater Cleveland Food Bank could not do what they do without us. And so some of the concerns is we're looking at how great the problem is, and Darcy had provided you with some statistical data about how much income or how much money we would actually have to put at the problem. And so you can see over the past few years with the pandemic, we've had a lot of federal, state, and local programs that have tried to address these issues. But unfortunately, now a lot of this cash flow is just not sustainable. It's such a large systemic problem that we can't seem to get to the root of it. And we all certainly need to work together. But some of the different things that we're very concerned about is the expiration of the enhanced child tax credit that expired in 2021. And so what that did is that we had allowed, the federal government had allowed more money per child, per family, and that has since dried up. And so that ended in 2021. So families lost on average about $300 per child per family. So the money that was allowing them to combat childhood food insecurity has since dissipated. And then during the pandemic, we had child nutrition program waivers. And what the child nutrition program waivers allowed us to do is normally where there's food that's being served, the children actually have to physically be there in order to receive the food. They have to be present in a community center or a summer feeding program or a school district. During the waiver program, that was waived so that children could just grab and go, and lunches could be packed and grab and go. And then the child also didn't necessarily need to be present during the pandemic when we were all concerned about catching COVID. The child themselves didn't have to be present to actually receive the meal. A parent or guardian or someone else could go and pick that up. And then the SNAP emergency allotments will be expiring the end of February 2023. So while our food sources, like the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, provide a lot of food, no one can provide food as most cost effectively as through the SNAP program. And so when this emergency allotment ends the end of February, we're going to see so many more seniors and so many more children and so many more families being food insecure. We're really concerned about the burden that it's going to put on our local food system here in Cleveland, and the nation as a whole should be concerned about this. And then of course, throughout the pandemic, we have all of our rising costs that are resulting where food is higher, 11%, gas 44% more, utilities 14%, and shelter costs are going up as well. That just leaves folks less and less and less money to deal with their basic needs that they need to address. This is also some information that's provided by the Greater Cleveland Food Bank. So Cuyahoga County could see an estimated loss of up to 54 million meals annually when the SNAP emergency allotments dissipate. So as you can see here in 2021, the Greater Cleveland Food Bank across the whole area that they serve provided about 36 million meals. And they're estimating that the shortfall is going to be 54 million meals in the area. We just cannot simply keep up with the demand that's happening here in our area. Again, to tell you just a little bit more about Hunger Network, we have a grassroots emergency food distribution network. We focus on minimizing food waste, and we focus on maximizing our community's access to culturally relevant foods. We do this through 3 methods. Most of you are probably familiar with the food pantry and the hot meal method, but we also have something called food rescue. Food rescue has been around for quite a while, but it's new here, relatively newer in Cuyahoga County. We work with a partnership out of the greater Pittsburgh area called 412 Food Rescue, where food rescue is accomplished via an app. And Hunger Network was the 3rd in the country, the 1st in Ohio, to implement this food rescue app. And so what you're seeing here is the EPA's food recovery hierarchy. So obviously the top strategy that we want to work on in reducing food is source reduction. And currently we're in the process with Westside Market of doing a food audit and a waste audit. And Hunger Network, in conjunction with Rust Belt Riders and Riddle, are working on minimizing the amount of food that goes to waste. As Darcy had mentioned, about 42% of the food that goes to waste is produce. 40% of all food across the United States is wasted. The largest source in landfills is food, and this just shouldn't be. We should be able to rescue this food or prevent it from even getting there. So as we're conducting our waste audit, that would be the first end of the hierarchy, the inverted pyramid, the largest section at the top. And then followed by that is food recovery. And so you can see, as we've started the waste audit at the Westside Market, we've been going through food from all the vendors that are currently present at Westside Market and showing, you can see here in the bottom, this is the food waste that would have been edible had we been able to rescue it. Over here in the other corner is the food waste that needs to be compostable. And so you can see there's some different things like skins and onion shells and things like that. That's just not consumable, but it is compostable. So after we rescue, we want to compost. Again, working on the food rescue model, we have a triad model where we use food providers that have excess food, which is unsellable but still editable. And that could be restaurants, that could be hotels, it could be the Westside Market, it could be grocery stores. We work mostly with Giant Eagle. And then we have volunteers who rescue that food via the Food Rescue app. And then we take it to our nonprofit partners. And generally those nonprofit partners could either be pantries or hot meals like the traditional system, but more often than not, they're more non-traditional partners that you don't think of maybe perhaps as serving food. Transitional housing, child head start, sober housing, just a wide variety of different needs in the community where folks are also being served for different types of services in the community. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop. You're there and you're receiving a service for something else, but we know you're also facing food insecurity. And so we have that food there for you to access while you're there. It eliminates transportation barriers. To date, we've rescued 3.8 million pounds of food from the waste stream, just us. So if you can imagine, since 2018, if so many organizations across the country were doing this, what our impact could be together. Actually, in the state of California, they've passed some legislation that makes it mandatory for all of their businesses that produce food to rescue it and to minimize or to compost. So if this legislation does what legislation traditionally does, which starts out on the West Coast and moves toward the East Coast, We're hoping that this could be something in the future that would be more of a universal solution to providing food for food insecurity. And then we're on down to the question and answer period.
Yes, indeed. And thank you so much, Julie Johnson and Darcy Freedman, for sharing your expertise with us today. We know it takes extra time and effort to prepare to speak with us from two very busy people, and we really appreciate it. Let's give them a hand. Now is indeed the time for questions and answers of our speakers. And in just a moment, I'll turn the Q&A over to Debbie Roy. And we'll also look at the Q&A box online for any questions from our virtual audience. Now, before Debbie recognizes the first attendee for a question, I'll mention this. If you'd like to be on the UUCC Forum Weekly email notification list, please fill out the form on the clipboard that will be passed around, and we'll turn it over to Debbie.
So this is a question for Julie. Our congregation supports Urban Hope, which is a soup kitchen in the near west side. And we work with Catholic workers. They serve during the week, and then the various Unitarian congregations rotate on Sundays to provide the meal. So at the beginning of January, we usually get about 30 people. All of a sudden, we had just a trickle of people. And we're thinking, what is going on here? And so our volunteer coordinator heard that there was another church that was serving meals that day. All of a sudden, they were providing a warming station, and then they provided meals. And it seemed like competition. We were glad that people were getting fed, but at the same time, we had a lot of food left over. It didn't go to waste. We have other avenues that we give it to, but I just wondered about the coordination of those things, and if we should be registered with the Hunger Network, so things like that are a little bit better coordinated.
That is one of the things that we do strive to do. So when you become a member of Hunger Network, we are a consortium that works together. So we provide funding, technical support, and then we also coordinate different things with the pantry managers or the hot meal manager sites. So as we do bring on members to Hunger Network, which is a free process, it doesn't cost anything to belong at all to Hunger Network. We establish hours, and we look at what are their hours and who's serving in that neighborhood. Just the same as, you saw this concern where it's kind of competition. It's good. The need is there, obviously, because the people are coming and it's fed, but it is a challenge to try to coordinate all of those things that are going on, because we have subsets of groups of organizations or groups that aren't even working together in concert. So we try to pull everyone together through the efforts of Hunger Network and also through the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, but that's just not always achievable. But if you would be interested, we would welcome having a conversation with you. The other option that I could offer you would be, we could food rescue that food if you would have leftover food that is still edible, that you couldn't serve yourself. So we don't want to see any food go to waste if we can prevent that.
We do share it with other Catholic workers, events, and St. Herman's Church, and
Yes.
a few other places that they know pretty much the people who need it, but they just don't. And I have to say, the problem has been solved. It turns out that was temporary. So we're back up to 30 people, and we're happy.
Good. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. This is such an important topic. I am a recipient, and so thank you. I appreciate all that you do for everyone. Two questions. I used to work in a prison system. I'm wondering how the jails and prisons are affected with food shortage and whether you include them in serving and feeding those people. And the second thing, you perhaps know that we in New UCC have a community garden available, and I'm very interested about how the improve the number of community gardens, hopefully in every community eventually is going, and if you're part of that network.
We do try to rescue from community gardens when we're invited to do so. So that would be a wonderful resource. And then I would say that we do have one organization, I believe, that we work with through our food rescue program that is a reentry program for folks. So it may not necessarily be in the prison system, but it's a reentry program that takes previously incarcerated individuals who are put back into the community, who have very, very limited resources, as I'm sure that you know. And so we do provide food to that organization. We rescue food from sources and take it there. But at the current date, though that is a wonderful idea, I don't know that we're currently involved with any of the prison systems. But we could certainly even rescue from there perhaps as well.
And I'll just make one comment about that, just to a system level problem where I remember I had a student who was a sociology PhD student, and he worked in the prisons and he was doing work with us on food security. I'm like, why do you want to work with us? It seems like these are really different topics. And he was telling me about, and he worked with men in prisons, about these men that would say, you know, I couldn't even feed my kid. And that cycle of, you know, when you can't meet, we can't even provide for this most simple, you know, simple basic need, what you'll do to, because you have to feed your kid. And a lot of people don't want to go to food pantries because of issues around stigma. And so you might get involved in the criminal justice system because what your real problem is that you were just trying to feed your child. And so I think that, you know, these are the things where it's connected. And how do we make sure when you come out, we are also looking at food access issues.
My question is for Dr. Freedman. You mentioned that you have fellows who go out and talk with the community and find out what their ideas are. Can you tell us what kinds of ideas they come up with, the community members?
Yes, so we currently have a program that we call it the Nourishing Power Fellowship. We have 10 community leaders who are committed to addressing food system issues within their area. And this project actually focuses, Julie showed you the different cities in the county. We focus on the 5 cities with the highest food insecurity, which Cleveland, East Cleveland, Garfield Heights, Euclid, and actually Cleveland Heights is in there. So within that, we have different examples. So one person he was working in childcare, and he also raises bees. And he's really interested in figuring out how to make a connection with kind of sparking interest around agriculture. So more than just a community garden, but really thinking about the business side around bee production, because you could have bees in your backyard. You know, it's potentially a more accessible way to do agriculture. So he's really kind of building out a business model around this link between beekeeping, honey production, and youth. Another person, has been working, she actually has a vegan restaurant to the point of prisons, but similarly schools, any institutional food system. She's interested in figuring out how do you get more healthy, culturally relevant foods served within school systems. And so we're working with her on that project. And another person is, there's 10, and I'm like trying to think, another person is really interested in, and the theme of this cohort is around sparking and expanding food justice for children and families. So they all kind of have a focus on children and families. Another one is around youth. And her sort of theory of change is that if we can get the kids to do it, they'll get their parents to do it. And so she's really looking at how do you expose kids to multiple opportunities around the city and county that expose you to different, whether it's community gardening or food production, restaurants, whatever, to kind of get kids curious, excited about opportunities in the food system. So those are just 3 examples. May 10th, you can save and I can share it with Laura, is the graduation ceremony for this cohort. We are still finalizing all the details, but May 10th, and they'll each be pitching their ideas for feedback.
I have a question about the role of capitalism in this situation and investment in infrastructure. Landlords who don't take care of their buildings, such as those Dave's on Lakeshore Boulevard that just closed down near Euclid Creek Beach. So there's 2 empty grocery stores on that store now that are abandoned. Are your groups working with laws to help encourage or support the grocery stores as a nonprofit status, so they don't have to pay real estate taxes when they can be in these poor neighborhoods, or food or grocery store models such as Aldi's, which is incredibly cheaper than all the other grocery stores? Are you working in that, or are you just getting the food to people, which is also really important?
I can share a little about the Food Policy Coalition at least. So Cuyahoga County Food Policy Coalition, it's one of the oldest food policy coalitions in the country. We have looked into these things. I think absolutely, the food system operates within an economic system in the United States that is a capitalist economic system. And there are certain things that go along with that system. And so the way that our food system works is that food is something you have to buy. It is not a right. There are other places where food is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, food is a right. Everybody has a right to food. The United States did not sign on to that piece of the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. So, we don't live in a country like that. Whether we think that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think those are things to be advocating for. I do believe, though, that we cannot expect grocery stores like Dave's to go in and say, out of the goodness of our heart, we're going to serve the people here in this community for, because they're running as a business. What they want to do is make money. And I think what we've seen is that increasingly there is such a link between whether or not you have access to healthy food and health outcomes. And we pay for it. We pay for it in Medicaid. We pay for it in Medicare. We pay for it in the prison system. We pay for all of these things, but we would rather pay that way versus upfront. Like, is there a way to think about tax credits or whatever? But, I also think at the same time, the whole food industry is changing, and COVID changed it as well. More people are shopping online. Do we need these big box grocery stores? Like, what does it look like, and how do you adapt and pivot? So it's a very complex issue. I mean, if you followed the Dave story, the city of Cleveland said, what can we do? And Dave said, there is not a customer base for us here.
Well, I think the landlord didn't take care of the building because they didn't own their building. It was a landlord issue.
So, I think there are, I think Dave's is a good grocery and they do a lot. They've done a lot, but they also, they didn't go into it to be like social justice advocates either.
But this is why it's a fundamental problem.
Yeah.
But I will also, if I could add to that too, we deal with all the grocery stores with our food rescue. So
Yeah.
I believe that a number of the grocery stores are very socially conscious. They realize that food is going to waste, that they can't get it out on their shelves. So they've started some different lower cost options. I can't remember what it's called, where they have reduced stuff on a wrapper that you can come in, but they do a lot of food rescue work for us. So how our food rescue system operates is we work most heavily with Giant Eagle, but we also do work with Dave's, Heinen's, any of the other local grocery stores that are interested in doing it. But it's actually time from their employees And I hate to say this, but it's easier to throw stuff all away than it is to call through your produce department every single day and pull what might be good and dispose of what isn't good. And so where we found the grocery stores to be exceptionally enthusiastic is doing all that calling and pulling it, because the folks who work in those produce departments, and that's the majority of stuff that we do rescue through food rescue, is generally produce and baked goods. They don't like to throw it away either. It makes them feel good and feel like they're contributing while they're working to be calling through that and then rescuing it and giving it to a source that can offer it for free instead of having it thrown away.
Building on Debbie's question, and maybe this is something either of you can answer. Dr. Freedman, when you noted that the percentage hasn't changed, it stayed 10%, and you had a quote about the systems are perfectly designed. So what do you see is designed into our system that maintains that 10%?
Yeah, well, I think the comment about the, capitalist, model where, I think there is that's part of it, is that, again, we have not made this a human right to have access to food. We do have an emergency food model. Julie's group is very involved in that. So we, at least in our country, I think we've said, we don't want people to starve, and we actually have a fairly robust model for emergency food and SNAP and things like that. I think in September of this year, the White House convened a forum. So we've had 50 years of policy around food security. And it was really like, what do the next 50 years look like? Could we do the moonshot? Like, could we end hunger in the United States? And my view is that ending hunger is going to be yes, we need that. There will always be people hungry. They lose a job, their life happens. We need sort of an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
And Julie and I were preparing for this. Most people, it is not an emergency. You probably see it at your pantry. It is a chronic need. It's not an emergency need. So that's the focus of Nourishing Power Network, is community-driven solutions that are adaptable, pivotable, sustainable, community ownership of change. So rather than only, external people controlling, more internal. And then lastly is, balancing supply and demand dynamics. So it's, again, back to the food waste. It's hard to get the corner store to have more fruit cups in the store if people aren't coming in and saying, I want fruit cups. They're going to sell what people are asking for. And so I think, how do we shift what people want? That's starting very early on. That's why we're focusing on children and families in our fellowship program, because we think, if you can start early, you're going to make a much bigger impact.
This is for either one of you. Or how can we form another group? And this is the challenge for faith communities. You were serving and someone else was serving. Faith is based on love, and I love the sign over there, hearts that love and hands that serve. Couldn't faith communities develop some kind of program where you work together? Because we are responsible for one another. And this is an avenue that maybe individually different churches, different faiths do different things, but to be united in purpose so that everyone knows what is going on and how they can fit into that system. It may fall under you, Julie. It may fall within a church community reaching out and saying, hey, let's work together. We all believe this is important and this is how we can serve. So, that's the challenge for this church and for the community.
Well, I'm so glad you actually asked that question, because believe it or not, that is how Hunger Network started off. Hunger Network started off as the Interchurch Council 40 years ago. And then I'm not quite sure how things transitioned along the lines, but what we're finding at this point, and you know, we are 11 people, so we were smaller then, is that we would love to have more churches be re-engaged back again with Hunger Network. Because if you look at our network itself and where the locations of our pantries are, they did start off in faith-based communities. I mean, they're in churches, the majority of them across the county. And so if you are interested in helping with that, or anyone else is interested in helping with that, don't volunteer, because I will take you up on that. We're very volunteer run. So we would love to get back to that. That's where kind of our grassroots origins came
Yes.
from.
Okay, I'm fascinated by what you're saying here, the stamp program, food stamps, all of those kinds of things are very real. I want to say something also about redlining, because it is part of this picture, and something about supermarkets and the profit system. They either have to make it by turnover, selling lots, or markup on what they sell, fewer. But long story short, I can remember I was with Finest and Tops supermarkets, and even Pick and Pay way back when. And we tried to open some superstores in the inner city. And we couldn't get banks to give us money. Overt discrimination on what we wanted to do. As it turned out, we were able to get some money from an international company called Ahold. And they funded us. They said as long as we can make money, they didn't care where we built the stores, because they didn't know this area. So we did in 1987 or 88, we opened a large superstore in Huff. And what we realized was that instead of opening a store up in the suburbs where we would turn profit in a year, it took us 3 years to turn a profit in those kinds of areas. We also opened the superstores in Harvard and on the east side too, all owned all that. But long story short, the management of this company that owned us changed management, and we went from someone that was very open-minded about where we built stores and how we did things to someone that was very closed-minded. And so, the company, long story short, even though we were building and so forth, went bankrupt in 2005, 2006. And so all those stores, the larger ones that we could build, the superstores in the lower income areas, weren't doing well. And so they took over some of them. And the one, for example, in Huff has never really done very well. And it's been split and so forth. So anyway, I'm interested in the nonprofit model that someone mentioned here about if a foundation, for example, would do an experiment and open some stores. It didn't have to be superstores, but just, smaller ones in neighborhoods. That the emphasis was on health foods, not the junk foods. I'm wondering how far you think that might go in terms of healthy nutrition and lower cost.
Yeah, so there is an experiment going on in Cleveland right now. Sisters of Charity Foundation is investing in a food co-op development in central neighborhood. I think one of the challenges, what does it mean to run this, and then sustainability? Because you're gonna, and from running these businesses, the margins of grocery stores is very, very, they hardly make, and the high margin areas are produce sections that, so there is something going on here in Cleveland with Sisters of Charity trying to build out a food co-op model. They've been working for a while. I always say, as a community psychologist, the field of dreams theory of change is not real. If you build it, they will come. So that's why I come back to community driven, because we have many examples of outsider developed, and these are not low cost solutions. Building a grocery store is extremely expensive. and then it doesn't work. So, I think it's key to get community investment and buy-in. And like you said, also thinking about like, what's the different trajectory of development? Maybe you turn a profit in a year, 3 years. So what are you doing to cover that? Is that a government support? I think more and more there are like healthy food financing. There are more tax programs to support food retail development in, food desert areas, food apartheid areas. But even those programs, many of them have resulted in closure. They have not been effective.
Thank you for being here. My wife and I were traveling recently and stayed in a hotel and had breakfast at the breakfast buffet. There was a tremendous amount of food left over and wasted. And I asked the hostess what they did with it, and she said they had to throw it all away because the management was afraid of liability issues.
Yes.
How big of a factor is this?
It is if it's on a buffet. So for instance, for food rescue, we will not rescue food from a buffet because it's been out for general purposes. We can't guarantee that the temperature has been accurate. We can't guarantee who's kind of been scooping through it, sneezing on it. I mean, that type of a thing. But if there were trays of food that were meant for the buffet that had been kept adequately in the warmer, or who had been prepared and put in the refrigerator or freezer and kept at wonderful temperatures, at accurate temperatures, we would certainly rescue that. It is a shame. What I would think in that type of situation, which would be ideal, would be going down on the hierarchy, feeding animals. So when I went to college, my first job as a freshman was in the dining hall. That's where everybody had to work for work study because nobody wanted to work in the dining hall. So if you were on the work study program, that's where you went. And we had a pig farmer in the community, and we sorted through paper in one, trash in food in the other, paper in one. The farmer would come and gather that up. That again is like a systemic thing. I think everybody just working together. So we've minimized the waste, we've rescued what we can. Then what's left? What do we do with that? Do we feed it to animals? Then if what we can't feed to animals, then we compost. That's like, again, getting that hierarchy from the inverted pyramid to go back to minimizing the amount of food waste that's actually thrown into the landfills. But yes, there would be liability with that. They were actually, the liability is resolved by the Emerson Act. And then we actually just had the Food Donation Improvement Act that went into law not that long ago, which even expands limits of liability toward the donor of the food. And so that's enhanced it. And there's some different conditions, and I would be glad to share that information following with an email or something if you'd want to read into the Food Donation Improvement Act. Mm-hmm.
This is obviously a topic of great interest to me, so pardon me for being prolific about my questions and comments. I used to be the manager of something called Retired Senior Volunteer Program. I don't even know if RSVP is still ongoing. I moved to Ohio from out of state. Obviously, and I heard some questions about volunteerism. Churches are a source of great volunteers. Well, so are we senior citizens in general, whether we're churched or not. And when I heard you mention, for instance, that the supermarkets, which are obviously they're in business to be able to make a profit. And so culling of the produce is a challenge for them. Well, I immediately think, well, I would think that some volunteers could be happy to assist with that. So what I'm getting at basically is there a coordination specifically of general population such as the senior citizens? Another population that I am a part of is those people on disability of some kind that isn't necessarily racially connected. That's another massive source of potential volunteers and obviously potentially recipients of need for food. My other main comment is I'm a big composter and I have been all my years. We have a network of picking up garbage, trash, and recycling is a happening, I think, in most communities, but I'm not certain about compost. There is a way to have community compost piles, or at least a collection of, like you said, our landfills are filled with unnecessary produce type materials. So volunteering and community composting is something else I would. And you've touched on each of these things, but just a way to hone in on kind of being part of the solution. Thank you.
And I think food rescue is a great way to.
So we do, with Food Rescue, it's 100% run by volunteers. You download the app, and my typical food rescuer is a person 60 or older who's retired, who has plenty of time on their hands and really wants to make a difference in the community. And so those are the folks that really download our Food Rescue app and then utilize that in their community. And then if you're familiar with the organization, again, I'll give a little plug for Rust Belt Riders. They are looking at locating community composting areas. Hunger Network is looking to do that in concert with Rust Belt Riders at some of our different locations. And they also have a home composting program. It does cost a little bit of money, but where they'll bring like the bucket to your home, and then you're able to put your compostables in the bucket, and then they come and pick it up just like your trash service would, but then they put that compost into making soil and composting that.
We have 3 bins out in our parking lot. We're part of the Rust Belt Riders.
Oh,
program.
wonderful. Are they nonprofit? Yes, Rust Belt Riders is a nonprofit organization, I believe.
So thanks again to our speakers, and yes. And make this great forum possible. Thank you, everybody who's here in person, and thank you to everyone who's attending virtually as well. You're invited now to join us next Sunday, January 29th, when the forum topic is redlining hospital closures and the effects on healthcare. Our speaker, Sadair Al-Kindi, MD, will report on long-term impacts on healthcare, such as cardiac disease, strokes, and cancer in redlined areas. And now you're welcome to attend the 10:15 Sunday service, either upstairs in the sanctuary or on the UCC YouTube page. Reverend Dr. Randy Partain will lead this service with a very intriguing topic, obscured vision and funhouse mirrors, as a part of this month's theme, Finding Our Center. I know some of you want to find out what that topic's all about. I'm happy to say that the collection plate today will be for the Hunger Network, which is the nonprofit in which one of our speakers, Julie Johnson, is CEO. You're welcome to donate in person or online to see what else is happening in our congregation. Please check out our website at uucleveland.org. Thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful week.